Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
And today, we're going to talk about food.
Yum.
It's our food unit for the month of November. We should talk about food more because people love to talk about food because people are hungry at least 3 times a day, maybe even 4 times a day. But sometimes you can kind of shorten that down. You can kind of combine 2 meals into one, especially when you're on holiday or vacation, or if it's a Sunday and you sleep late. Yeah, you kind of missed breakfast and it's a little too early for lunch. So what do? You have brunch.
Brunch is fun. And there's usually more options at that point in time. If I do have brunch, though, I tend to stick with traditional breakfast foods that seem kind of heavy normally. I'll get French toast, and potatoes and bacon. That's what I like for brunch. What about you? What do you guys usually get for brunch?
Yeah, it's usually the traditional breakfast food. Although when I was a kid, of course, during the week we had to hurry to get to school and stuff. So usually we just had cereal with milk and maybe some toast and maybe some juice and milk or something. But we didn't have time for French toast or waffles or pancakes or bacon or sausage or Canadian bacon or whatever. So that stuff had to be saved for the weekend, especially on Sunday. And yeah, we'd have that meal at about maybe 10 in the morning or so. So again, a little late for breakfast, a little early for lunch, and that's why it's brunch. But as we're going to find out today, there are different ways in which to enjoy brunch, and we'll talk about the different ways that people consume food during their brunches as our lesson continues. So let's get to it. Let's read the entire contents of our lesson, and then we'll come back to talk about it. Brunch is so much more than just a weekend meal. Served between the usual hours of breakfast and lunch, and named accordingly, this fantastic feast of morning and midday foods is a cultural icon. The world is wild about brunch, but when did this crazy love affair begin? Here's a brief history of the world's most fashionable meal. Unsurprisingly, brunch doesn't hail from humble origins. The first recorded use of the term was by the English writer Guy Beringer. He despised getting up early on Sundays, and in 1895, he wrote an essay suggesting that people indulge in a late Sunday morning meal. Brunch. A plea argued that the ideal brunch should be a light meal of sweet and salty foods. This wider range of food types and flavors meant that if someone preferred an alcoholic drink with their meal, that would also be acceptable. Little else is known about Beringer, but his words clearly struck a chord with members of elite British and American society. During the early 1900s, brunch was becoming a prominent pastime of wealthy American college students. However, it really cemented itself as a staple of the U.S.'s free-spending upper classes after Prohibition began in 1920. With the government banning alcohol nationwide, private brunch parties became the perfect place for a discreet drink or two. Emerging during this time were distinguished brunch cocktails like the Mimosa and the Bloody Mary. With the end of World War II, brunch spread throughout the American middle class. Housewives, in particular, appreciated its Sunday morning popularity, as it meant they only had to prepare 2 family meals instead of 3. The 1980s saw brunch spread to chain restaurants that targeted the masses with the rise of the all-you-can-eat brunch buffet. Critics moaned that brunch had lost its class, but take a look at any brunch menu today, and you'll agree that the meal remains as marvelous as ever. Okay, let's get to it. Let's discuss the contents of today's lesson. It's the delicious story of how brunch came to be. I don't know if we actually said what this word means here, but brunch is basically a combination of 2 words, breakfast and lunch. Brunch. I don't know if you have an equivalent term in Chinese, 早午饭 or something like that. I don't know if you can actually say that, but in English we do have this term brunch. It's kind of cute.
It is cute. Well, it's so much more than just a weekend meal. And for the most part, I think I totally agree with Tom. It's more of a weekend thing when you have more time just to relax. I tend to do a brunch Saturday morning with a friend. I'll have brunch with different friends. And sometimes it's more breakfast, in food choices. And sometimes it's a little bit more like lunch. But it's a fun time to get together because you can still sleep in. I can't sleep past like 8 o'clock. That's just impossible for me. But to get up and go sit with your family or a friend before it gets all crazy and busy at lunchtime is kind of fun. Well, it's more than just a weekend meal. It's served between the usual hours of breakfast and lunch and named accordingly. Accordingly just means something that's done the way you think it should be done. It's done accordingly. Maybe they tell you in school, we want you all to stand up and line up in the hallway and line up based on your last name and line up accordingly. It just means according to the directions you've been given or in a way that's appropriate. Usually they tell you what to do and then they say, okay, so do it according to the instructions we gave you. Here it's named accordingly to the hours that it falls under, and that's breakfast and lunch. Brunch.
Yeah, sometimes they'll actually say hence something like it's served between the hours of breakfast and lunch, hence the name brunch.
Yeah.
Therefore, the name. So that's kind of what accordingly means here, basically based on the word breakfast and lunch. They're kind of smushed together there. And so you've got brunch there. And this fantastic feast of morning and midday foods is a cultural icon. Yes, everybody knows about this and people look forward to it on Saturday. Oh, we're going to have brunch tomorrow. It's going to be great.
Fun.
I remember a friend of mine many years ago used to write for newspapers here in Taipei, and she would go to the various brunch buffets at the local hotels, and then she would write a review, and she would invite friends with so she could get their comments and stuff like that. I kind of forgot all about that. You can actually go to some of these hotels, and even if you're not staying there...
Yeah, you don't have to be someone who's staying in a room.
Yeah, you don't have to be a guest. You can just pay the fee. It's not going to be cheap, but still it might be an interesting experience to eat all that food, to stuff yourself silly with all that food. Hey, once a week, what the heck? You can forget about your diet once a week. But again, it's a fantastic feast of morning and midday foods. And the world is wild about brunch. Everybody seems to enjoy it. But when did this crazy love affair begin? Yeah, when did people start going nuts for brunch?
Yeah, we'll often use this term love affair with something when there's some sort of trend that's really popular. When did this love affair with, Uggs begin? Those boots that people wear. Or Crocs, those plastic shoes. So love affair just means a lot of people just loving a particular trend or something that's become popular. Well, we've got a brief history of the world's most fashionable meal to share with you in this particular lesson.
Exactly. So we'll continue talking about this in the next paragraph. It says, unsurprisingly, brunch doesn't hail from humble origins. Basically, that sentence means is that it's not something that came from everyday people, working class people. Of course, it probably came from the upper classes. So here we've got the phrase hail from. Sometimes that means that's where you're from. Hey, I hail from Arkansas. That's where I'm from. And in this particular case, it's referring to the origin of this tradition. Yeah, it doesn't hail from humble origins. It doesn't come from a humble beginning. Basically, again, as I said, working class people did not invent this tradition.
No, of course not. They were busy serving the wealthy and working with the wealthy. They were probably up at dawn and getting their work underway. They wouldn't have time to sit around and eat brunch. Life was pretty tough, even 50, 60 years ago for the working class. This is the guy that came up with it. The first recorded use of the term was by the English writer Guy Beringer. So we've got another guy for you. We had a guy earlier this month in one of our articles, Guy Beringer. Now, he was the one who actually is the first person that ever wrote that word down. We don't know if he invented it or if he stole it from a clever friend. But since he's a writer, he gets credit because he's the one that wrote it down. So we have documents where he's written this word. Now, he despised getting up early on Sundays. If you despise something, you hate something. I despise that. I could say I despise math.I'll just be honest, I really hated math class. He despised getting up early on Sundays. And in 1895, that was a while ago, he wrote an essay suggesting that people indulge or treat themselves, indulge in a late Sunday morning meal. Yeah, I bet a lot of people reading that thought,Yeah, I wish I could, dude. Although they didn't say dude back then. I'm sure they wanted to, but a lot of these people reading the papers were working very hard back then. They had long work days, started very early in the morning, and they were working after the sun went down.
Indeed. So he wrote this essay, and in that essay, he suggested that people enjoy or indulge in a late Sunday morning meal. And the title of the article was Brunch, a Plea. And that argued that the ideal brunch should be a light meal of sweet and salty foods. So, yeah, a plea. When you plea, or a plea is when you kind of beg someone to do something. You're making a request. So he was basically saying, yeah, we should have brunch because it should be a light meal of sweet foods and salty foods kind of mixed together. And so that's kind of where we think the word brunch came from. And that probably is where the tradition started and spread like wildfire all over the world. Okay, that brings us to the midway point in today's lesson. Let's take a break right now and listen to our very hungry Chinese teacher.
谢谢美语老师。Hello, my name is Shelby. 我们今天篇章结构来看早午餐是怎么来的。一开始说 brunch 不仅是周末的一餐，在早餐和午餐之间供应，这奇妙的早晨半日餐是文化的标志。第三句，世界已为它着迷，但疯狂的喜爱是何时开始？接着空格一 It's wild about something 对什么感到疯狂迷恋？提问这个 love affairs 开始的时间。Love affair 恋爱，这里指人对早午餐的热爱。可以推测空格应该回应这个问题，并引出下一段介绍早午餐起源的主题句。选项 D， 这里是个迷人一餐的简短历史。History 这个字涵盖了时间和发展，所以我们答案选 D。 第二段第一句，早午餐不是来自卑微的起源， Hail from 是表示来自于哪里。接着最开始使用这名词是英国作家盖贝林格。第三句，他厌恶周日早起 despise something 鄙视某件事情。在1895年他写了一篇文章，建议人们要享受一下早午餐。动词 suggest 当作建议的时候，后面紧接的 that 子句通常是该做而未做的事情，用假设语气。动词要写成 should 加原形或者动词的过去式，而 should 又常被省略。在这句中 that 子句的动词就是 should indulge， 写成 indulge in something 表示投入某事。接着空格2，下一句，大范围的食物口味意味着如果想用酒精饮料也是可接受的。既然是作家提议这新想法，书籍可能就是他的工具。有大范围的食物表示各种口味都有。选项 B brunch a plea plea 请求，后面有引号，表示是书籍等专有名词。句子文意，早午餐一个请求，争论说理想的一餐应该是有甜有咸的轻食，呼应连结上下句。第二题答案选 B。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, everybody. We're going to continue talking about brunch. And last time we were talking about the origin of brunch, or at least the term. And again, we said that brunch doesn't hail from humble origins.
No.
It probably came from the upper classes in England. And we talked about Guy Beringer, who despised getting up early on Sundays and wrote an essay trying to get people to indulge in a late Sunday morning meal, which he called brunch, and the article was called Brunch a Plea. It should be a light meal of sweet and salty foods. Now, this wider range of food types and flavors meant that if someone preferred an alcoholic drink with their meal, that would also be acceptable. Which is kind of strange because, to me at least, even in my family, you didn't really drink alcoholic beverages until the evening, okay? It was kind of off limits for breakfast, of course. Maybe for lunch you could have some wine or a beer or something like that. But, before dinner, my parents had the tradition of having pre-dinner cocktails. Used to, have a martini, and they would have highballs and stuff like that. But again, those are consumed in the evening. But here he said that, if you want to and you're eating brunch, you could have an alcoholic drink, which again has alcohol. It could be beer, wine, vodka, gin, gaoliang. Those are all alcoholic drinks.
This probably isn't fair, but I'm just going to guess that Mr. Beringer probably had a drinking issue, a drinking problem.
Yeah, that's a little early.
If you're drinking alcohol at 10 o'clock in the morning, I would say there might be a bit of an issue. But hopefully not. Anyway, he just wanted a meal that would combine the sweet and the salty together. And so it does that if you go to a good brunch, especially a buffet. There are lots of different choices of food. Some are sweet for the kids mostly. Kids love the sweet stuff. And then for the adults, they might get something more like, the eggs, maybe even an omelet, some potatoes. I love potatoes at those buffets. Anyway, he thought that this wider range of food types and flavors meant that if someone preferred or actually wanted an alcoholic drink with their meal, it would be acceptable because boy, it certainly wasn't acceptable back then, even today, to be drinking at 10 a.m. That's a bad sign, guys. If you prefer something, it just means you have a choice between different things, and you tend to pick one of those that you prefer or you like better than something else. So to prefer just means you like something better than other things. And Tom did talk about the alcoholic drink. He hoped, Mr. Beringer at least, he hoped that, having some alcohol at brunch would be acceptable.
Well, I must confess that there was a period of time in which I drank beer in the morning.
Wow.
But that was because I worked the graveyard shift at a motel.
Oh, so you hadn't been to bed.
Right. I worked from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m.
That's not the same. Yeah.
So, after I got off at 7 a.m., I'd go home and listen to the radio and have a beer.
Relax,
And then I'd probably go to sleep until about 2 in the afternoon or something like that. That's weird. I don't like working the graveyard shift, but some people do that.
I don't either.
I was young. I was just out of college and stuff like that. But, most of the time, you're not supposed to have alcoholic beverages.
And it's not good
early.
right before you go to bed either, Tom.
Yeah, probably not. But that's another subject. But in any case, this fella thought that it was okay to have an alcoholic drink with your meal, with your brunch. Now, little else is known about Beringer. We don't know much else about him, but his words clearly struck a chord with members of elite British and American society. So here, strike a chord. Struck a chord is past tense. That means, it's something that you really listened to and you thought he was saying something that you could agree with. Yes, that really struck a chord with me. Your favorite politician, for example, who's running for office may have said something that you really liked. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm going to vote for this person.
That's how I feel. Yeah.
Yeah, it strikes a chord with you. It sounds really good to you, and you totally agree with that. So yes, rich British people and rich American people thought that was just what they wanted to hear. They were elite, which means they're rich. They're the upper crust, the top of society. And during the early 1900s, brunch was becoming a prominent pastime of wealthy American college students. A pastime, of course, is a tradition that you follow pretty much all your life. I guess we often say that Baseball is a popular pastime in the USA, and there are all sorts of traditions that people have, especially if there's some kind of activity that everybody does.
It says, though, however, it really cemented itself as a staple of the U.S.'s free-spending upper classes after Prohibition began in 1920. This makes sense. So something cemented, it becomes very firm, very hard. And a staple of something is something that is, usually we talk about a staple as a kind of food like rice, beans, corn, wheat, things that we need in our lives to survive. But here it just means something that is seen quite frequently, something that becomes a custom or maybe a tradition, but only of the free-spending upper classes in the States. This was after Prohibition began in 1920. In 1920, Prohibition was when any sort of alcoholic drink was outlawed. It was illegal to drink. Of course, people just cheated and, snuck in alcohol when they could. They had bars that were called speakeasies that you could go and find and drink there. A lot of the cops were dirty. They were being paid bribes to keep some of these bars, illegal bars, open. But anyway, that's when brunch really caught on and became a tradition or more of a custom in just American society, especially among those who had money.
So with the government banning alcohol nationwide, private brunch parties became the perfect place for a discreet drink or two. So discreet, that's an adjective. It just means you're doing something you're probably not supposed to be doing, but you got to be very careful so that nobody notices you. So yeah, you can take some food from the back refrigerator, but be discreet. Don't let anybody see you.
Emerging or coming out during this time were distinguished brunch cocktails like the mimosa and the Bloody Mary. Yeah, I don't know what the mimosa is. I know the Bloody Mary is with tomato juice and alcohol, but those are supposed to be good when you have a hangover in the morning and you wake up. So with the end of World War II, brunch spread throughout the American middle class. The middle class was making more money at this point. Not as many people had to work from sun up to sundown. Housewives in particular appreciated its Sunday morning popularity as it meant, I only have to cook twice and not 3 times in one day. Poor moms. So the 1980s saw brunch spread to chain restaurants. It's really popular in restaurants around the world, I would say, that targeted the masses with the rise of the all-you-can-eat brunch buffet. Yeah, it wasn't just a buffet. It was that you could eat as much as you want for just one, flat price. So it became very popular. It's still popular today.
Yep, all you can eat. 吃到饱, I think they call it. All you can eat brunch buffet. Some restaurants have an all you can eat salad bar. And critics moaned that brunch had lost its class. So yeah, it was originally supposed to be something kind of classy for rich people. So they moaned, they complained, they whined about this. This is supposed to be for rich people, not for vulgar working class people. But take a look at any brunch menu today and you'll agree that the meal remains as marvelous as ever. So yeah, they're always going to complain when middle class people and poor people start doing things that rich people do. So rich people have to think of something else to prove their superiority. So they probably came up with some other fad for eating food or something like that. But in any case, now everybody can do it, and lots of places do have these brunch menus. You can get all sorts of food at restaurants, or you can simply cook it at home. And yeah, it's a pastime that remains as marvelous as ever. And I'm looking forward to this coming weekend. I think I'm going to go check out brunch buffet at one of the local hotels, even if it is really expensive.
Oh, nice. Sounds like a great idea. If you haven't tried it, guys, but I bet a lot of our listeners have. Try a brunch, and if you really want to have a lot of food, or at least a big range of food, try one of the brunch buffets at one of the hotels here in town. You won't be disappointed. Right now, we're going to listen to our Chinese teacher, who I'm sure has already been to one of these brunch buffets before.
第3段第1句，关于贝林格没多少被知道，但是他的话却 struck a chord。chord 和弦，这片语是引起共鸣。With elite 在精英阶级，空格3 However 它呢 cemented itself cement 巩固，它将自己巩固成 美国 Free Spending 时期的主食，在禁酒令开始之后 Prohibition 禁止，这里是大写，表示大战时期的禁酒令。虽然精英赞同它，空格下一句说，直到1920年地位才巩固，可以推测空格3应该是在1920年之前尚未流行，但有少数人喜爱。选项一，1900早期早午餐渐渐变成有钱大学生的 pastime 消遣，这句符合时间精英的条件，所以我们答案选一。接着下一句，随着政府禁止酒精，私人早午餐就变成绝佳的场所来小酌几杯，甚至后面 discreet 谨慎的 a discreet drink 谨慎的饮酒。接着空格4，既然会偷偷小酌，那推测这题可能就与酒类有关。选项 F emerging during this time， emerge 冒出来加 ing 放在句首，强调正在兴起。主词是 were 之后的 distinguished brunch cocktails， 著名的早午餐鸡尾酒。During this time 在这段期间，呼应禁酒时期， cocktails 呼应上一句的 alcohol， 所以文意连贯，我们答案选 F。 第4段一开始说，随着战争结束，早午餐会扩散到全世界。我们到第3句，1980年代早午餐蔓延到大众连锁餐厅，随着吃到饱的兴起。 With the rise of something， 随着什么的兴起， rise 原意是上升或者增加。空格5又接着，但是看看今日菜单，你一定同意这一餐依然出色。 remain 保持，后面接分词、形容词或者名词等。句为 as as ever， 跟以往一样。本来呢只针对精英的，现在竟然蔓延到大众餐厅。但空格下一句又以 but 开头，口气转折，说现在的早午餐仍像以前一样出色。可以推测空格5可能是说明有一群人不乐见早午餐蔓延到大众餐厅。选项 C， 评论家哀鸣早午餐已经失去了阶级。Critics 评论家 moaned 抱怨 lost his class 来呼应早午餐竟然跑到大众餐厅去，文意连贯通顺，所以这题答案选 C。 以上是今天的讲解，谢谢收听。
That's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And hey, if you have brunch this weekend, enjoy it. But, chew your food and take your time. You don't want to get really fat from eating too much food, even though it is so tasty. Okay, that brings us to the end of our program. Thank you for joining us. Please join us again next time. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.